A new report is highlighting refugees from Africa who are traveling to the U.S. to seek asylum. The article by the LA Times details how they've traveled thousands of miles to get there and the conditions some are living in an impromptu refugee camp in Mexico. Molly O'Toole is an immigration reporter for the LA Times. I just want to sort of map that out for people that, we have been covering, obviously, the crisis at the border nonstop. And we often are talking about people coming from Central America. We have heard the Trump administration suggest that terrorists may be coming across the border. And what your reporting has revealed is that they are people from other countries. They're not terrorists. They're fleeing persecution, war, all kinds of other things. And you start off by profiling a man from Africa.
Right. It's really incredible what we've found there. I mean, many people don't know, as you say, there's been a lot of focus, and particularly from this administration and their rhetoric, on Central Americans who are coming, Central American families who are primarily seeking asylum. But actually, there are a lot of international migrants who are coming from all over the world, and they know that if they get to the U.S.-Mexico border, that U.S. law essentially establishes a right for them to claim asylum there at the U.S.-Mexico border. And so what we saw in person was an impromptu refugee camp of people from all over the world, and many people from Cameroon, from Angola, from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who have built this camp right on the Rio Grande, and they're essentially being pushed back against the river by some of the policies between the United States and Mexico that seek to limit even legal entries. So people who wish to go to official ports of entry in order to present themselves to immigration authorities and claim asylum are being prevented from doing so by primarily U.S. policy.
Yeah, and Molly, the way the Trump administration has been characterizing a lot of the people at the border is that maybe they're fleeing, a high crime neighborhood or poverty, and they've been sort of raising the question as to whether or not that should be a reason to seek asylum. But the people that you spoke to were not fleeing crime and poverty. They were fleeing sort of imminent risk of death. In fact, there's a quote in your article where, one of the men says, "We were sleeping beside corpses."
Right. That was Luis from Cameroon, and he had escaped a widening conflict in Cameroon, which is a West African nation, between the Anglophone minority and the Francophone majority. And many of the people we spoke to had what you might think of as more traditional asylum cases, where they were fleeing war. In some circumstances, they described government security forces who had killed members of their family, religious persecution, political oppression, fitting those 5 categories of asylum that are laid out in international and U.S. law. So more traditional asylum cases that typically would qualify. These are the people coming from all around the world to seek asylum in the United States. They feel strongly that the United States is the only place that they will be safe. But many of them are trying to follow the law. They are eager and adamant about following U.S. law, presenting themselves at ports of entry in order to claim asylum. But due to the policy known as metering that the Trump administration has put into place since 2017, it limits the amount of people who are taken at these ports of entry every day. So they've been encouraging people to go to ports of entry and not cross between ports of entry, cross the river in Texas, for example. But then they're limiting the people who do go to those official ports of entry.
How does one travel from Africa to the U.S.-Mexico border? I mean, there's no direct route here.
Absolutely not. No, it's really incredible, this journey. What started to happen is that as the U.S. and Europe as well, they narrow their refugee policy by which you would apply for refugee status from outside of the country that you're trying to go to. People have learned that they can go to the U.S.-Mexico border and claim asylum there, but they have to physically get themselves there. So they take advantage of looser visa requirements in Ecuador and Brazil, namely in South America. They find a route, they find a way within Africa, if we're speaking about Africans specifically, in order to fly to Ecuador or Brazil, and then they essentially walk. They walk or by bus or at certain parts by boat, and they use South America, Central America as a land bridge to get to Mexico, crossing through Mexico to get to that northern border. But many of them are becoming stuck between the metering policy of limiting legal entry and the Remain in Mexico policy, in which people are essentially being turned around to wait for their immigration cases places in Mexico. You know, there's estimated to be upwards of 30,000 people from all around the world who are essentially stuck in this purgatory of indefinite waiting at the U.S.-Mexico border right now.
And the Trump administration has sort of presented this policy as a way of maybe hopefully deterring people from coming at all. You know, they've said just tell them not to come. But for these people, there's no turning around to go back to where they came from. It's too far of a journey, thousands of miles. The camps are sort of makeshift camps. They're not official camps being put together by Mexico or the U.S. or anything like that. What are the conditions like that they're living under now? And is it better or worse than what they came from?
Well, many of them will describe, even if they're concerned about the conditions, and they're completely exposed to the elements. They're living in tents. In this part of Mexico and Texas, you have these massive summer storms. Every few days, you have completely soggy tents. The entire camp is flooded. There are a lot of families, a lot of very young children and babies. Illnesses are going around. There's a lot of fear that there could be some sort of outbreak. Mosquitoes, Luis from Cameroon said the mosquitoes in Mexico, northern Mexico, are bigger than he saw anywhere in Africa. I mean, the conditions are pretty atrocious. They don't get really any help except for the occasional charity from groups coming across the border in the U.S. or the occasional charity from people in Mexico. This is unofficial. This is an impromptu refugee camp that's cropped up in large part due to a result of these policies. But many will say we will wait as long as it takes because if we go back to our countries, we will be killed.
Molly O'Toole, really important stories to tell. These are the stories that are being sort of forgotten in the big hubbub of coverage about the crisis at the border. So I'm really sort of impressed and thankful that you wrote this article.
Thank you.